Hi, everyone. My name is LaShawn, and welcome to my podcast. Today, I'm going to talk about family systems theory and how this framework helps social workers understand behaviors by looking at relationships, patterns, and overall family dynamics. Family systems theory was developed by psychiatrist Murray Bowen. The theory is grounded in the idea that you really can't understand a person without also understanding the family system in which they are a part of. Families are seen as emotional units, which means everyone is connected. Each person's thoughts, feelings, and behaviors can influence others, whether we realize it or not. So instead of asking what's wrong with this individual, Bowen encourages us to ask what's happening in the family that could be influencing this behavior. So, why does this matter? Well, family systems theory encourages social workers to look at the whole family, not just one identified client. For example, if a child is acting out, a social worker would explore communication patterns, stress in the home, and roles each family member plays rather than just labeling the child as the sole problem. This approach is especially helpful in child welfare, schools, and family therapy, where issues rarely come from just one person. Even small changes like helping a parent respond calmly instead of reacting in frustration can ripple through the family and shift the emotional climate. Now, let's take a closer look at some of the key concepts in Bowen's family systems theory and how they help explain the way families function as emotional systems. The first key concept is the idea of the family as an emotional unit. This means that family members are deeply connected and constantly influencing one and another's emotional experiences. When stress or anxiety increases in one person, it often doesn't stay with them. It spreads throughout the whole family. For example, if a parent is dealing with a lot of stress at work, that might show up as irritability at home, which can then impact how their children respond or behave. In social work practice, this reminds us to look beyond just one individual and really pay attention to the relationships and environment around them. Another central concept is differential of self, which refers to a person's ability to maintain their own sense of identity while still staying emotionally connected to others. For instance, someone with a higher level of differential is more likely to stay calm during family conflict and communicate their thoughts without becoming overly reactive. So imagine a teenager calmly explaining to their parents why they want to change schools instead of yelling or shutting down because of pressure or stress. On the other hand, someone with lower differentiation may become more emotionally reactive and feel heavily influenced by other people's expectations or emotions. That same teenager might react with anger or withdraw completely if they feel their parents disapprove. In social work practice, helping clients strengthen their level of differentiation can support better emotional regulation, clearer boundaries, and healthier way of managing conflict. Another key concept in Bowen's theory is triangles, which are considered the basic building blocks of emotional systems. So basically, when tensions build between two people, a third person often gets pulled in to help reduce the anxiety. Imagine conflict between parents that leads one parent to vent to a child. While this might temporarily ease the stress between the adults, it puts emotional pressure on the child and can create long term tension in the family. In social work practice, helping families recognize these triangulation patterns is important. Social workers can guide family members toward more direct, healthy communication instead of relying on a third person to carry the stress. Another important concept is chronic anxiety. This refers to ongoing stress or tension that affects the whole family, not just one person. So think of it like this: the family is a connected system. When one member is anxious or stressed, it can ripple through everyone, shaping everyone's moods, behaviors, and interactions. For instance, long term financial stress, unresolved conflict, or illness might make a parent irritable at home, and that tension can then affect the children, which will lead them to act out or withdraw. Siblings might start arguing more, or a teenager may become anxious themselves. For social workers, understanding chronic anxiety is important because it helps explain why families may struggle with things like emotional regulation, communication, and problem solving. and it shows where support can make the biggest difference. Another key concept is the multi-generational transmission process. This is when patterns of emotional functioning can be passed down through generations. For example, a parent who grew up in a household with a lot of tension might unintentionally recreate similar dynamics within their own family. Social workers often use tools like genograms, which are basically diagrams of a family, to help clients see patterns in relationships, behaviors, and emotional connections that have been carried over from previous generations. Recognizing these patterns give families the insight they need to make intentional changes and break cycles that no longer serve them. Another important concept is emotional cutoff. This happens when people distance themselves either physically or emotionally from family members to deal with ongoing tensions or stressful relationships. For instance, an adult child might limit or even cut off contact with their parents to avoid arguments or stress. While this can reduce tension in the moment, it can also make it harder to grow emotionally and can affect how the family functions as a whole. In social work practice, looking at these patterns help professionals understand ongoing relationships, struggles, and support clients in building healthier connections or setting boundaries when needed. And another concept is the nuclear family emotional system, which looks at how emotions and behaviors show up and affect each other within a family, especially between parents and children. For example, tensions between parents might show up as behavioral challenges in a child. For social workers, this highlights why it is important to pay attention to couple dynamics, parenting stress, and how family members relate to each other day to day. Now that we explored the key concept, let's look at how social workers can put Bowen's ideas into practice. Bowen's family systems theory just doesn't show up. Bowen's family systems theory doesn't help us understand family dynamics, but it also guides how we work with families. Instead of trying to fix problems or just reduce symptoms, Bowen informed practice helps people manage their emotions, strengthen their sense of self, and respond thoughtfully in their relationships. So, how does this actually look in social work? Well, social workers can use practical tools like genograms to map patterns across generations, observe family interactions, and coach clients on emotional regulation and differentiation. These strategies help families communicate better, manage stress, and respond to challenges in healthier ways. Bowen's approach aligns perfectly with social work values, focus on empowerment, client centered practice, and building long term resilience in settings like child welfare, schools, and mental health agencies. Bowen described his role more as coaching rather than traditional therapy. Instead of being a rescuer or authority figure, the social worker guides clients in building self awareness and taking responsibility for how they respond in relationships. The goal is to help people think before they react so they can respond calmly and intentionally, even in stressful situations. Researchers like McKay explains Bowen's approach can also help people who have experienced trauma. So instead of focusing just on the traumatic event itself, it looks at patterns and how people react emotionally in their relationships. Social workers help clients manage their emotions more effectively and make choices that reflect their values rather than staying stuck in anxiety from past experiences. When clients face conflicts within the family, like disagreements or mediation, Bowen's approach helps social workers spot triangles and reduce indirect communication. Rather than letting tensions get passed into a third person, social workers guide family members to talk directly and openly, keeping interactions clear and healthy. The goal of Bowen family systems theory isn't to change other people. It's about helping each person improve how they function within the family. When someone becomes more self aware and less reactive, it can slowly shift the emotional atmosphere for the whole family. Bowen's family system theory continues to influence family therapy and social work. Scholars like Keller and Noon highlight differentiation of self as a key factor in family emotional functioning. Research shows that higher differentiation is linked to better emotional regulation, healthier relationships, and stronger overall family dynamics. Bowen's focus on multi-generational patterns also lead us to the widespread use of genograms and other systematic assessment tools in practice. By looking at family history across generations, social workers can spot recurring patterns in relationships instead of just focusing on what's happening in the moment. While research supports key concepts like differentiation of self and multi-generational patterns, scholars note that more research is needed to fully understand how these concepts apply across different family type settings and circumstances. Rothbaum and colleagues have explored how Bowen's ideas fit with attachment and culture. They found that family relationships and emotional patterns can vary across a lot of different cultures. Even though the theory started in a Western setting, it focuses on how people relate to each other, can be applied to many types of families. The way Boda's ideas about differentiation, relationship patterns, and systematic assessments are still used in family therapy just shows how relevant his theory remains today. Bowen family system theory gives us valuable insight into how families work and guide clinical practice. However, it's also important to look at both its strengths and limitations. One strength of the Bowman family systems theory is its systematic perspective. So instead of blaming one person, it looks at patterns and relationships that influence behavior. For example, rather than labeling a teenager as defiant, a social worker might explore stress or conflict in the household that's affecting that teenager's behavior. This approach reduces blame and increases understanding. The emphasis on differentiation also helps people develop emotional maturity, set healthy boundaries, and take responsibility for their actions so they can respond thoughtfully instead of reacting impulsively. Another strength is this multi generational perspective. So, looking at patterns across generations helps clients see that many behaviors are learned, not personal flaws, which can reduce shame and increase their understanding. For instance, someone who struggles with emotional distance might notice similar patterns in earlier generations, which gives them insight and motivations to make changes. This theory does have some limitations. Bowen's approach can be challenging to apply for clients who are in the middle of a crisis or if they're dealing with severe trauma. For example, a family facing domestic violence or house instability might need immediate safe planning and crisis support before they're ready to explore deeper multi generational patterns. Another limitation is that Bowen's theory was developed in a Western culture context. So it may need careful adaptation for families from different cultural backgrounds. In some cultures, strong family interdependence is valued and doesn't mean low differentiation. Social workers will need to use the theory thoughtfully and avoid applying Western assumptions to every family. Despite these limitations, Bowen family system theory remains a foundational model in family therapy and continues to inform systematic social work practice. In my current role, I've seen firsthand how family patterns influence behavior. By using a Bowen lens, I notice how stress, communication styles, and emotional reactions in parents often ripple through the whole household. For example, when a parent learns to pause and respond calmly instead of reacting in frustration, it can change the tone of the entire home. Helping families recognize these patterns and make small intentional changes really shows the power of focusing on relationships and emotional regulation. Because of experiences like this, I would absolutely use Bowling Family Systems theory in my practice. And not only helps explain the why behind behaviors, but also provides practical ways to support healthier, more thoughtful interactions with families. Bowen family system theory gives social workers a powerful lens for understanding how emotions and relationships shape family by focusing on the differentiation, relationship patterns, and multi-generational influences. The theory goes beyond blaming individuals and encourages a systematic perspective, but its descriptive ideas and practical applications continue to guide social workers in helping families communicate better, manage emotions, and respond more thoughtfully to each other. This is LaShawn, and thank you so much for listening to my podcast.